The motif of responsibility has always been an integral part of any Spider-Man film, but I believe a bit more contextualization is required here to fully grasp what it means to really don the mantle of a superhero. I remember watching No Way Home when it first came out in theaters and walking out absolutely dumbfounded. Marvel had actually pulled off a decent Spider-Man trope. Spider-Man was no longer a privileged teen doing as he liked under the protection of Stark. He was the dichotomy of a man bound by love and his sense of duty. And this is what really drives the story forward. More on that in a bit. Really quickly, I want to explain how this video will play out. We do a quick rundown of all the Spider-Man in the movie, how their ideologies and their abilities have changed when we compare them to their past selves. Next, we see how all the villains add a depth of nuance to the characters, and how the Spider-Men supplement each other. And finally, we take a look at what we can see for Spider-Man in the foreseeable future. So, let's get into it. Spider-Man is a very delicate character. His age and the insurmountable pressure on his shoulders appeals to a wide demographic, particularly teenagers and young adolescents, and that is the baseline for how we judge a Peter Parker in this movie. He might have been to Titan to fight Thanos or faced off against the Avengers in a civil war, but at the end of the day, Spider-Man's just a kid. All of his insecurities are insecurities we see in ourselves. Now, at the beginning of the movie, he responds to the chaos from the fallout of his identity being revealed just the way you would expect him to. He runs off to Bleecker Street and finds an adult that can control the situation. Despite being in tough spots before, he still feels inadequate and helpless, and so turns to a father figure. Tom Holland's Peter hasn't aged very well, making the same mistakes and running the same character arc. Tobey's Spider-Man was one that had become the wizened sage archetype. He has been the Spider-Man for the longest time, and the effects of his constant dichotomy between Peter and Spider-Man could not have been made clearer. When Ned opens the portal, we see him walk through wearing normal civilian garb. He knows that he doesn't have to be Spider-Man when he can be Peter Parker. And this is made clearer when the trio prepare to fight the final battle. The only time Tobey reveals he was wearing a Spider-Man suit was when it was needed. He can distinguish between both lives, but it is clear from his demeanor he would prefer not to be Spider-Man unless absolutely necessary. This is in stark contrast to Andrew's Spider-Man that keeps his suit on for the entirety of the movie. He is bold and swings around this version of New York City for a chance at understanding it. He is definitely still very young, still filled with vigor and passion for science, that being very evident from his statements about the multiverse and his curiosity over Tobey's web slingers, or rather, lack thereof. But one reason for all the enthusiasm and childish exuberance could be so that he can keep his mind away from his loss of Gwen. It is clear in the movie that her death is something he carries with him and comes to terms with by being Spider-Man. Being Spider-Man is not so much about the joyful pursuit as it is about the escape it provides. Since Tom's Spider-Man was only coming to terms with the brutality of life after the death of his aunt, the idea that he could receive positive reinforcement from his other selves made his recuperation timely. It didn't take long for him to understand the great power from great responsibility adage. He was kicked into gear by people that have dealt with more tragic losses and have lived by and honored that code their entire lives. Being Spider-Man is always a deliberate choice on Peter's part. It is a choice born not out of pride or hubris, but from sheer desire to do good by others, even to the detriment of their own well-being. But every Peter realizes one way or another that this is not a reasoned choice, or rather it is, until they see the consequences that come out of it. When being Spider-Man is too much for them to bear, they realize that it was never really about choice. It was about deliberately making yourself accountable. It was about sacrificing yourself to do right by others. It was about taking responsibility. It is a frivolous endeavor until it becomes their mission statement. This transition from reasoned choice to altruistic heroism can come only from a strong emotional catalyst. And that is what Tom's Peter desperately needed to define what he does at the end of the movie to make the tough call. Despite these Spider-Man's tragic losses and their constant struggles, they still see hope inside everyone and believe deep down that every individual is redeemable. Their villains are founded on the antithesis of the responsibility philosophy, with great power comes no accountability. Despite this outwardly misplaced purview on life, the Spider-Man know that every one of them was a good man that became the victim of unfortunate circumstances. Otto Octavius was at the mercy of his sentient mechanical arms, Max Dillon was exploited and mistreated every step of his life, and Norman Osborn was just a man with a very severe personality disorder. They can't help who they are, or who they have become, but each one of them deserves a shot at redemption. This belief, however naive, is what pushes each Spider-Man to do better. Could there be a future for Tom Holland's Spider-Man sometime in the future? Well, hopefully yes, if the entire thing doesn't turn head over heels with Sony and Marvel vying for the right to the character. But putting capitalistic agenda aside, the post-credits scene from No Way Home did show that a piece of the symbiote was left behind when Doctor Strange reverted the spell. They can integrate this into the next film in a myriad of ways, because since Peter doesn't have an identity, he can make one on his own. This could integrate new characters, relationships, and maybe even another New York-based superhero. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But in the meantime, go ahead and check out some of the theories that we have on what a Spider-Man and Daredevil adaptation could possibly look like. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next one.